During the winter of 2013-14, a revolution began in Ukraine. After decades of corrupt governments, the people had had enough of their dictator president kowtowing to Russia while lining his pockets with money stolen from the nation's treasury. What began as a peaceful protest was met with police brutality, violence, and ultimately the death of more than 100 protesters. But the people won. In early 2014, the president and many of his corrupt cronies fled to Russia. But as the victors started planning for a new democratic government, Vladimir Putin moved his Russian troops into Crimea on the Black Sea. And he promoted a counter-revolution in the east of Ukraine, the location of the country's mines and heavy industry. People still loyal to the dead Soviet Union of Joseph Stalin were told that a Nazi coup had taken place in the capital, and they took up arms believing they were keeping fascists out. Russia moved troops and heavy artillery into the area, while Putin denied any involvement whatsoever in either territory. Then in the summer of 2014, a Russian missile shot down a Malaysian Airlines passenger plane high above the area. 298 people were killed. Europe and America initiated sanctions against Russia, and a high-level meeting was called between the leaders of Ukraine, Russia and the separatist-controlled areas. It was held in Minsk, Belarus, and the agreement to cease fire was called the Minsk Protocol. But the fighting didn't stop. It lasted throughout the winter, and the areas of Donetsk and Luhansk were taken by the Russian-backed separatists and declared independent territories. Anyone who disagreed was tortured, imprisoned or killed. Similarly in Crimea, anyone disagreeing with the Russia-imposed government there was harassed or imprisoned. This is the background to our story. The city of Debaltseve is located just outside the Russian-controlled area of Donbass. It is a major rail hub and transportation center and a strategic bridgehead for further military advancement. Ukraine needed to keep it, and Russia wanted it. The battle for the city and the region began in mid-2014. But the Russians were rebuffed time and time again. The Ukrainian defenses held. But in the hard winter of January 2015, the Russians and their separatist proxies, bolstered by the huge Russian army nearby, began to surround the Ukrainian position. In spite of being outmanned and outgunned, the Ukrainian divisions held their ground. US and Europe, seeing that the Minsk agreement signed months earlier had not stopped the Russians, called for a second summit meeting, this time involving not only Ukraine and Russia, but also Germany and France. On February 11, 2015, Angela Merkel, François Hollande, Petro Poroshenko and Vladimir Putin met in Minsk.
Путін, який приїхав на переговори, не був готовий до жодного компромісу. Тоді я прийняв рішення перейти до найбільш простих питань. І кажу, що є пропозиція просто зараз домовитись про час припинення вогню. Я був шокований, коли я почув відповідь «ні». Ми вогонь припиняти не будемо.
A deal was finally arrived at, but the ink was barely dry on the new Minsk agreement when Russian and separatist troops broke the truce.
4 години тиші, потім знову почалося.
До бою, перша!
With the Ukrainians caught by surprise, the Russian troops moved quickly to close the ring around Debaltseve. When the West learned that Putin did not keep his word, the European Union, the US and Canada imposed heavy sanctions against Russia, which are still in place today and are stopping Putin from further aggression. But the Ukrainian soldiers holding Debaltseve were virtually surrounded. This is the story of that battle that turned the tide of the war. In August 2014, Ukrainian airborne troops began the longest raid behind enemy lines in history. For 242 days, a handful of virtually indestructible Ukrainian soldiers held an airport in eastern Ukraine as if it was the Alamo. The terrified enemy called them the cyborgs. This is their story.
А теперь огонь по Кадыровски!